Hello and welcome once again to Android Design in Action. Today's episode is actually a slightly different format. This is a pre-recorded version of the show because we have a special guest here today. So before we introduce everybody, my name is Roman Nurek. I'm your host. We're also joined by Nick Butcher over in London. And
Hello.
Like we mentioned before, we're joined today by a special guest.
Hi, I'm Alex Faaborg, designer on the Android team. Very happy to be here.
And today we're going to be talking about notifications and the design process, and Alex will be leading the way with a bunch of slides. Before we jump in, Alex, do you want to introduce yourself, say a few words about what you're doing?
Yeah, sure thing. So I work on sort of the Android system and platform, so things like notifications, obviously the topic of the show today, intents, launcher, just sort of the base interface of the OS itself.
Awesome. And do you focus primarily on interaction design, visual design, or would you say that you have a specialty in any of those areas?
Primarily interaction, some visual direction, but yeah, mostly interactive designer.
Awesome. Okay.
And hopefully a lot of people have seen the excellent Google I/O presentation that you gave with Christian Robertson as well on design for engineers. I've particularly enjoyed that and have cribbed a lot of your lines that you used in many of my presentations.
Thanks. Yes. To plug my other video. Yeah. But keep watching this, and then when you're done watching this, be sure to check out Advanced Design for Engineering from I/O 2012.
Yeah. Okay, so with that, should we jump into the slides about notifications? And
yeah, definitely. So notifications and you. Let's dive into this. The first thing I want to talk about is the psychology concept of flow. Flows, basically, it's kind of hard to describe. I mean, you can read the Wikipedia article about it if that helps, but it's best to just sort of think about times you've experienced it. So it's when sort of everything fades away and you're just really focused intently on something you're creating. So like if you're a musician, you're not thinking about the musical instrument that you're playing. Or even playing video games. You don't think about the controller that you're holding. The controller just sort of fades away. And you also get into the state with computing a lot where you're sort of engaged in what you're doing. Or with a mobile device, you're out in the world engaged. And what can destroy flow is interruptions. And notifications are kind of fundamentally interruptive. So flow's a really good state for people to be in, and it's a little bit dangerous to be sort of constantly pulling them out of that. The main problem there is that they're just not going to be as effective. Flow is proposed by the psychologist Csikszentmihalyi, and it's characterized by this sort of complete absorption of what you're doing.
So it's kind of like a feeling of I'm in the zone, like kind of like I'm.
Yeah, it's like exactly what it is.
Okay.
So I think what's important to think about is sort of the user's attention stream is this sort of precious resource that needs to be protected. Especially like on tablets, these sort of larger format devices, they're possibly reading a book. Although effectively a lot of full screen apps are now going in sort of lights out mode where people aren't going to be as visually interrupted. But
it's almost like a feeling of immersiveness, right? Like you're immersed in the content and what you're doing.
Yeah. So I think it's really important to think about, assuming the user is immersed, is it worthwhile to interrupt them with the notification that your application is about to generate? Sometimes it is. So, but just use a sort of developer analogy. Basically, what you're doing is you're kind of blocking the user thread. Like literally the user's brain. Like you are blocking their sort of cognitive flow momentarily to deliver your notification. So do you want to block that thread? So 3 rules for creating a notification. The first one is, does it involve another person? So like a real-time chat. Is there someone, or a hangout or something? Is there someone sitting there waiting for you? So you need to get that person's attention because this other person's actually waiting on them.
It's kind of like, is another thread waiting on you to
exactly.
complete?
Right. Another very important human thread. It's like waiting for you. So that's the first one. Is it time sensitive? You block something on your calendar, that event's going to end, you need to get to it. And that's sort of one of the reasons why you'd want to deliver a notification. And then finally, is it something that the user specifically requested? So like an alarm doesn't involve another person. It is time sensitive, and it's something the user set. So is this something where the user said, please remind me at this moment, or if this happens, then of course that's totally okay to barge in. A lot of notifications on Android don't follow these 3 rules. And that's not good. We would love to see applications put sort of more thought and care and sort of planning into if a notification is worthwhile or not. And we have some new capabilities, especially with the low priority notifications, where your application can generate a notification and put it in the shade. So when the user goes in there, they see it, but it's not something that's going to cause the phone to vibrate and buzz or the LED to illuminate. So it's not going to actively grab the user's attention. It's just going to be there in case they go and check. So it's kind of that notification is kind of along for the ride when another notification does actually ping you. Then they can consume all of them and by clustering them together.
And we've talked about this a little bit on the show. I think we kind of called them opportunistic notifications, right? If you have the opportunity, if the user is already in the process of checking, what's going on, then give them that information. And an example of this would be Google Now's weather, right? I think by default, weather is a low priority notification, so it only shows up if you already expanded the notification shade.
Right. So actually, all of Google Now's notifications are low priority, with the exception of time to leave. So if we are monitoring traffic and realize that you really need to leave soon because the traffic's heavy and the only way you're going to arrive on time is if you take off right now, then we go ahead and interrupt. But that's actually the only case of Google Now doing an interruptive notification. And all of the others are, we were calling them ambient notifications, the sort of notion of they're just there. But I think low priority is the official name.
So if you're a developer and you're figuring out how to do this, it's actually extremely easy. Luckily, if you're using the notification compat class, all you need to do is just pass in a priority of I think is priority.low, or there's a constant value for it. And the good thing is that if this actually is only supported on Jelly Bean and above, but if you're on earlier versions of the platform, you'll actually see an interrupted notification. It's kind of like, there's no way to show notification in the expanded state that's not also in the collapsed state on earlier versions, but you will benefit from the new kind of better, more correct behavior on newer devices without having to do any sort of backward compatibility code, since it's already done for you.
And it's worth saying that there's other priorities other than low. While low is the only one that'll, not interrupt the user, I do believe we use the priority to order the list of notifications, right? So I think if they have something which is extremely high priority, or you can recognize that your notification does qualify by the rules, but isn't the most important thing in the user's world, then you can set something between low and max. There's some intermediate levels, so you can really hint to the user so that they find that list more useful when it's sorted.
Yeah.
And don't just set it to max because you want your notification to be above all of the other applications.
Yeah, I think the one major takeaway so far is just be mindful of what the user wants, right? Don't your application, and I think Adam Powell in the framework team uses an analogy really well. You're a guest in the user's house, right? The user's house, the device. You're a guest there. If you're an application that's installing the device, be mindful and be respectful. You don't want to barge them and bombard them with.
Imagine your notification is an air horn, and and after the user is suddenly startled by it, then you have to back that up with interesting information that they care about and find relevant. They say, "Thank you for sounding that air horn right then."
That's a good idea. Maybe when you're developing, you can set a custom notification ringtone of an air horn, just to test whether you really think you are interrupting at the right time.
Yeah. Or we should just change the API to name it interrupt the user, and then people will be more mindful.
Like notification manager dot interrupt and potentially piss off the user.
Yeah, right? And it is worth noting that users can silence your notification or silence your application from generating any notifications. They can also uninstall your application if it's becoming overly annoying. Beyond just it being the right thing to do, there are good reasons to not annoy the user through notifications. And that's especially true of notifications that are trying to solicit positive reviews in the store. Oh, yeah. I would love to see a study if that actually results in more negative reviews or not. I would assume that could be a likely scenario.
Yeah. We definitely have some best practices on when to solicit reviews and what not to do, especially not to ask for 5-star reviews, things like that. Yeah. But certainly, notifications are they're really something that's more timely. If you want to ask the user for a review, if there's any place to put it, it's not going to be in a notification. It's probably going to be somewhere deep within your app in either help or about somewhere that they're kind of already exploring more about your app and potentially they want to give you feedback.
Yeah, or
and normally after they've had a good outcome, I find as well.
Right.
Don't just do it, first launch or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, they should have at least had a chance to use it. I would say probably you should never ask for a review. But if you are going to, at least do it inside your application, not while they're using another application.
Right.
I guess another important thing to note is correct usage of toasts. So a toast should be a direct response to a user action. Usually as a nice little confirmation, so like message sent or item archived, these types of things, where you're hitting a button and then it's just kind of immediately mirroring back like, yep, got it. Do not generate a toast when your application doesn't have focus.
I remember we talked about this when we were working on the style guide a while ago, and this was one of the big things, one of your biggest pet peeves, right?
It is. So I have a couple of different banking applications installed on my phone, and I'll be using something else, and just in the middle of nowhere, I'll get a toast that says your banking session has ended, and I don't even know which application is responsible.
Is it Bank A or Bank B?
Yeah, I mean, because I tend to open them, at the same time. So like, not only do I can't even like contact them to be like, look, guys, this is wrong. So really not helpful to show a toast out of nowhere. Sort of the reason we have a whole notification shade and notification manager and all of this is to have that nice place for your message. Also important not to treat notifications as a kind of almost like error log. I know there's some note applications where it'll generate a notification that says like note was saved to the cloud. It's like, great.
Right. I mean, that's the
I'm so happy
behavior,
for you.
Right?
Yeah. I was actually off doing something else.
Right.
I had just left, but I'm glad you took care of that and then told me about it. So obviously, anything that's just sort of your app managing itself, I would even say take this as far as we shouldn't be notifying people about software updates. It's something we're working on, which is Android itself not following that rule. But yeah, it should involve other people, it should be time sensitive, or it should be something the user specifically requested.
Awesome. Yeah, very, very good general advice. And just on the topic of notifications, while we're on it, we also have a design pattern documented on developer.android.com/design that talks about lots of different situations where you should show notifications. And in addition, if you're, we touched a little bit on help and things like that. There's also a pattern that talks about help and tutorials, not exactly related to notifications, but still definitely stuff that you should read. Yeah.
All right, should we move on to talking about design process?
Let's do it.
All right, design workflow. So we thought this would be a fun topic to go into. Just sort of talk about some of the ways that design teams at Google have their workflow, which is likely almost the same as everywhere else. Usually this stuff is pretty standard. But talk about sort of the various artifacts that we create, the reasons we create them, sort of what purpose they serve at each stage of the process. Start running through that. So the example we use is Google Now. I got a chance to be one of the designers on Google Now,
which is very widely recognized, and very widely recognized as really, really kind of awesome design overall. And a lot of folks have been looking at that as kind of inspiration, taking inspiration from it. So just personally, I want to applaud you guys and the design team for building an awesome product.
Oh, thank you. It was a super talented team that got to work on it. So we'll give you kind of a behind-the-scenes look, sort of like movie special features of what it looked like before it was awesome, as it was being created.
I don't know, it kind of always looked awesome from what we saw.
We'll see. So here's actually some of the very first sketches of Google Now up on a whiteboard. And as you can see, not great at drawing perfect rectangles. But what's great about sketches is for soliciting really high-level feedback. So when you show someone just a bunch of sort of markings on a whiteboard like this, they're immediately engaged in the idea and coming up with their own ideas. And providing feedback on the level of they feel like it's appropriate to provide feedback at this stage. Whereas if you show someone this like perfectly rendered high fidelity mock-up, they'll start commenting on really minor details, but they won't be like, actually that's a bad idea.
Right.
Like you shouldn't be doing this at all. Or have you thought about these other things that are slightly related? So it's important to sort of scale the fidelity of the mock-ups you're creating with the type of engagement you want from the people you're showing them to. So obviously at this point we were just trying to generate ideas on if we had this sort of proactive software that was pulling information for you, what information would it pull? It would be interesting. So we were kind of going through various actions you could have on the cards and the types of cards, and actually a lot of the stuff ended up shipping. I think everything on this whiteboard is actually in product, which is pretty awesome.
Different stages, right? I mean, not everything rolled out in the very first version, but
this was all in the first version.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we got
the flight notifications.
Yeah, we had flight notifications.
Oh,
in the
really?
first version. We didn't have boarding passes.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's your very first sketch of Google Now. From then, we quickly sort of staffed up the design team and had more people working on it. And here's kind of image of the sort of war room we had as we were quickly posting stuff up on the wall for review. So again, it's at that sort of sketch level. There's some more higher fidelity things here that are exploring visual design, but the sort of purpose here is to go as broad as possible instead of as deep as possible. Explore as many ideas as you can. You're trying to sort of solicit feedback from people and be creative. So not being overly critical of any ideas, to sort of shut brainstorming down, but saying, oh, that's cool, but have you tried this? And always kind of redirecting if you're trying to steer things in a particular direction.
Quick question. I mean, at this stage, are you thinking about layout? I mean, so in the earlier stage, you're probably thinking a little bit about layout, but more about the functionality, the actual product itself. Like, what will the user be able to get out of this? What are their benefits? What are the different things they can do? But at this stage, are you starting to think about layout yet, and potentially even I guess like the pixels themselves? Probably not, right?
So I know a lot of at this stage, the visual designers were starting to think about, what if we were doing automatic layout based on the content, and kind of taking the overall spirit of what the application was about and applying that to kind of their space. Yeah. So that was a little bit different than normal. The layout is obviously, you can't not have a layout. Is you're creating one of these.
But you're not trying to
these mock-ups,
I guess what I'm trying to get at is are you thinking about all the different situations for layout? Because I mean, as an Android developer, you have to think about, how does this look on a tablet? How does this look in portrait, landscape?
No, at this point, we were just purely doing phones, and we figured we'd deal with tablet later. Sure. And tablet ended up just being just sort of multiple columns of cards. So we, in some ways, we still kind of dodged that. I mean, it's an effective layout for the device, but it wasn't. It didn't provide a lot of custom work for us.
Sure.
To do that layout. So. So we're still generating ideas. Next up would be wireframes. We actually, we were kind of short on time with Google Now, so we totally skipped wireframes. Here's my approximation of a wireframe. This is actually higher fidelity than you would have. So then we kind of dove to full fidelity mockups. These were actually created for like a Larry Page review. And at that point, you're sort of presenting the full vision of the application for feedback. You're saying, we've put a lot of thought into this. This is sort of how we imagine it. And you're trying to get feedback on sort of fine details and also kind of the spirit of the thing as a whole, as opposed to feedback specifically on these sort of finer things like layout.
Right.
So you're giving them what could potentially be pixel perfect mocks. These ended up being very different from what we actually shipped. But they were, at least at the time, pixel perfect to really help them visualize what this thing's going to be about.
But I guess maybe because it was a review for executives, for somebody that's kind of higher up, you want to make sure that they are fully they're seeing the actual vision, maybe not sketches. You don't want to show sketches to a C-level person, I'm guessing, right?
It always depends, I guess, on the executive and sort of how they're engaged in the product. But I think it's often easier for people to get excited about something that looks real. It's also it communicates sort of the amount of work and thought that you've put into it when you dive to sort of full fidelity mockups at that stage. And it lets you sort of test certain boundaries. Like the contextual header in Google Now was definitely something new. And here we were actually using photographs, and we were just sort of interested what feedback that was going to sort of generate. And we weren't, even at the time, we weren't super comfortable with photographs, but we wanted to put those into the full fidelity mockups, just kind of push that boundary of what we'd be doing with the Google brand. So then obviously you want to use full fidelity for sort of visual exploration. So here we have kind of the full range of photograph with a filter applied to it, and then some sort of extremely sort of block imagery, very sort of illustrative. At the bottom here, with the most simplistic of bridges, which is actually pretty ridiculous. Look at it that way. But we're just trying to see the range versus something more like this. So we spent a lot of time on this contextual header. One of our super talented visual designers created this sort of sequence where here we have really kind of abstract art. I loved these. I actually kind of like this direction better than what we thought.
I would actually love these as wallpapers.
Aren't these beautiful? Yeah, they're very, very talented.
Very cool.
And here it was a mixture of time and day and weather as opposed to place. We ended up focusing on place because we felt that people often have this kind of connection to where they live and this sort of almost pride in their hometown. And so we're kind of leveraging that. Also, when you're traveling, it's really neat to see the new headers. So we dropped just the purely abstract, but I thought these were just absolutely beautiful. Even more abstract, we thought that was going too far. Here was sort of a mixture of more abstract with some items in the background of place. And then we started exploring this notion of cities. San Francisco being shown here, and some one of Seattle. Here's that same style, sort of a country town.
So and then just trying out
sort of
aesthetics,
each one was kind of triggering the next as we would get these posted up on the wall and sort of talk about what it conveys and how people are going to feel as they see it. So then this brought us a little bit closer to where we landed. It was sort of a little bit more detailed, but still illustrative. And then here's we're filming in New York today, so I thought I'd show one of the early New York ones. With these sort of strong shadows, which we see a lot in a lot of Google's design work.
Like the 45-degree angle.
Which
is an experiment with the kind of the hollow style text input box as well.
Oh yeah, it is. And we ended up dropping that because it didn't quite have the sort of visual hierarchy that we were looking for. Especially without controlling the background, it was falling out. But this was the one that we kind of settled on as the direction we really liked, and then from there it was iterating on going out and creating all the cities. Here we have London, New York, there's San Francisco, and all the different times of day.
And just I personally love the color palettes. I mean, to me, the if you were to drop these into something like cooler.adobe.com or even Dribble, when, they give you kind of like a color range, or like if you upload a photo or upload a design, they kind of give you the general color scheme. I feel like these, if you were to import those, they would result in some of the best color palettes. I just personally am in love with especially the San Francisco one.
Yeah, the ones at night, I love this New York one at night with the airplane.
Do you know how many permutations of headers you ended up generating?
So there's actually quite a few more than this. We're doing them over time and staging out cities. We started targeting. We were trying to get all the cities by population for a while, and then we realized we weren't getting some of the tech centers, so those got kind of accelerated to include those. So over time you'll see more and more cities. We actually do use some filters on photographs in Google now, just so we could have more coverage at launch, because these obviously take some time to make. But this was sort of the art style that we...
I love the ambition of it as well, that we're going to provide a localized header for every major city. Wow.
Yeah, I know, which a lot of people were kind of critical of, and I was trying to make the argument, well, it's a finite set. I mean, we can...
But I think it conveys something about the product, right? This is Google, and there's an element of magic, and Google boils oceans and does these crazy big tasks, and I think it resonates with Google's image and what we're trying to do with now. I think very, very well.
Yeah, I guess it's also actually important to talk about. So higher level, why are we doing all of this? We wanted to be sure that when you went into the application, you understood that it was contextual. And having the header change over time made sort of every part, even the artwork, contextual, and have it change based off your location. So it became this sort of immediate sort of visual affordance of, oh, these cards really are alive. They're about what's happening right now and right here. So it was able to set that tone. Whereas Google.com, its white is kind of about the infinite possibilities of finding anything. This is obviously you can still do a search, but it's also sort of we've created the search based off of your current context. So we felt that it was sort of helpful to set the user's expectations of what the application would do right off the bat with the header. Even the motion graphics design was done to convey that, though. The notion of the cards dealing in, where you see them deal immediately, helps establish this mental model of these were just created for you based on what's happening right now. Also, one of the reasons I was focusing on a card metaphor was it can kind of help with expectations of, like when you're playing cards, this may or may not be a good hand. Thankfully, the quality has been great now. In the beginning, it wasn't. So
managing expectations.
Managing expectations,
a good theme there.
Like, I got good cards this time. So, yeah. So that, but it's worth noting that in addition to all the visual design I'm showing here, there was a lot of motion graphics design that went into Google Now. We actually had a dedicated motion graphics designer who was working on cards dealing in, the field expanding, the microphone radiating, and the sort of circles coming off of the microphone as an indication of if you're speaking too loud or not, which I thought was really interesting.
Oh, wow.
So like one of the problems with speech recognition is for some reason people, they assume the accuracy is not going to be great. And so they kind of naturally just kind of start shouting at the device.
Oh, yeah, my parents are...
yeah, I think everyone's parents do this.
Google,
mine as
pizza
well.
in New York.
Yeah. And the problem with that is then you start blowing out the microphone.
Right.
So actually the recognition is much worse because you can't even get a good signal. So we wanted something to sort of show, nope, too loud. So it actually hits sort of this outer radius and turns red if you, or I believe it does. That was the design at least. I need to go back and make sure we finish that. But yeah, to have that kind of immediate feedback and have it feel live. So kind of continuing on with slides here.
We'll ask more about motion graphics.
Oh yeah, sure thing. Well, I mean, motion graphic also kind of comes into play in the, this is sort of the most static way of describing motion graphics, which is not a good way, but here's the flow. You're basically trying to visualize a sequence of steps. These are useful for knowing kind of, sort of what your keyframes are in terms of, I need to animate from here to here, and I have no idea how to do that, which is actually not the best way of framing it to a motion graphics designer. It's more about what
as developers, as engineers,
what sort of like feeling you want to evoke and what you're trying to communicate with the graphics. But flows are also really useful for just sort of understanding the sort of temporal complexity of your application, which is, it's important to get it up on the board and look at it, saying, is it actually too difficult to get from this location to this other location? There's too many navigation steps. It's going to take these or too much time. People often think about complexity in terms of the number of objects on screen. But if you make things simply by introducing navigational steps, you've really just kind of shifted your complexity into a different type of complexity. So it's really good to look at the sequences so you can see temporal complexity. We also then, sort of final stage is red lines, just for communicating sort of specific values, colors, padding, things like this. Because you want everything to be pixel perfect and in perfect alignment. This was actually a much earlier design of Google Now for the red line, but this is that stage as we were moving on to engineering. This was the red line we used right then.
This is actually something that's a very important tool for designers to communicate with developers, right? So as a developer, you generally look at you may look at a pixel perfect and you may say, okay, I need to roughly approximate this. So let me just make this like 3 dips or 4 dips, and that looks about right. And let me actually just do this. So as a designer, I mean, if you're communicating and working with developers, make sure to give them these pieces of information. And another thing I just want to add in here is make sure to note what should stretch, what should be fixed, what is responsive. Almost put in like, if it requires text, like a text description, like this should stay fixed and so on and so forth. Make sure to include that. That's one of the most important tools, I think, for communicating between designers and developers.
Yeah. And often,
do you have any similar kind of techniques for doing motion? Like, do you, like, I don't know how you would document that you wanted to animate in a certain way. Would you just use the keyframe type snapshots, or do you have like a similar technique to red lines for saying this should move like this? Or
we don't. We do it all with hand gestures, actually, which is not nearly as exact as if we had a red line. But often the motion graphics designer, they're sort of, I mean, you're generating the videos that can then be used, to convert to the final animations. So from those you can extract, timing and things like that. So I mean, it'd be similar to like instead of red line, a developer going into Photoshop and actually measuring distances, and that you have to like view the properties in After Effects and
And in some cases, I mean, if you have the resources, you could also probably, spend some time to prototype something. I think, I don't know if we have any prototype engineers, but I know that some companies actually have folks that don't even build the software, the final shipping software, but they will build a prototype that roughly approximates the general behaviors, interactions, and motion, potentially using the actual tools you'll be using to build the app, or using things like processing.js or even HTML, JavaScript, something that's kind of really easy and lightweight and easy to iterate on. Those tools can be very useful for, again, communicating that idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then communicating late in the process and communicating early in the process, you're just focusing on how do you want to sort of set the stage of your application? How does it immediately present itself? What do you want the user's attention to focus on? Because much like dinosaurs, T-Rexes, seeing motion, our eye will be drawn to anything that's animating. So as you're doing the motion graphics design, it's again about the user's attention. What you're notifying them of in that moment in time of what on screen you want them to fixate on, how you want to sort of draw their attention to something. So.
And it's another case of don't animate needlessly. Don't animate just for visual flair. Animate
right. Have a purpose, a story of your animation, a reason you want users to focus on something. So yeah, I mean, like in Google now, when you say Google, it goes into microphone mode. So we wanted people, obviously. You might just say Google while looking at it. So the search field stretches down, so you can see sort of what you acted on as you're going into that mode. Obviously, when you tap it, you don't need to communicate that as much because you literally touched it. But for the voice input, I thought that was a really effective way of telling that story of the search field has become the microphone input. So even though it's not taking text entry at that point, you're still speaking to this object. So
that's awesome.
That's so cool. That's sort of the level of sort of analysis you have to do in terms of the motion graphics and crafting that story about how the application behaves.
Awesome.
Yeah, so let's move on to some final social engineering tips for as you are showing your mock-ups. So one of the first things that I found is really effective is you want the feeling to be very collaborative as you're showing these to various engineers and product managers and marketing people you're working with. So one of the easiest things you can do is showing your work live in the application used to create it. So as people are generating feedback, you're adding notes, you're making changes. So it feels like it's this sort of fluid living document as opposed to printing it out and posting it up on the wall and having everyone just kind of look at it, or even just projecting it, but it's like a flattened PDF or something where it feels more finalized.
It feels like progress, like actual progress is being made right there in that moment.
Yeah, exactly. And not only are you listening to them, but their input is being directly influencing. So it's not like pair designing in a way instead of pair programming. Or if you do print your work out, set it at a table, flat on the table, have both people sitting there with pens kind of marking going up. So it feels like it's very sort of collaborative. And it's important to sort of, as you're defending reasons that you did something or trying not to have the design be changed in a particular way, don't say, oh, well, I'm the designer, or that's my opinion. Back it up with specific design principles, with actual reasons that are irrefutable on why it needs to be that way.
It's tough because some things are so very subjective. Some things are just like, I have this intuition and I can't explain it. But definitely a big part of the communication process is articulating what you're thinking.
Yeah, or even if it feels, often it's not subjective. There are actual reasons why something should be a certain way. Underlying cognitive science and design principles, and or even just existing user studies. If you even have done a user study on it yourself, there are previous user studies that point to the same results that you can anticipate. So that's very important to sort of make sure that your take on the design is kind of dripping in science. Because if it's just my opinion versus your opinion, then you could just continue debating forever. Engineers don't debate, I think it should crash more, or I think it should be slower. And the design does have these fundamental principles. Various usability heuristics, things that we've learned through years of testing on how people are going to behave, what they're going to focus on. If they're going to be annoyed by how many notifications your application is creating.
It's probably a good moment to say that the design guidelines that we have on developer.andrew.com/design. I mean, a lot of that is taking into account all these studies that we've done and all these kind of things that we have that you guys have had in your minds for a while and putting it down on paper. Not necessarily, saying that these are the only things that you should be doing, but a lot of that is driven by these heuristics, as you mentioned.
Yeah. Obviously provides great guidance. Good plug. I should have said that as well. So yeah, let's move on to questions quickly.
Yeah, and before we move on to questions, we're running a little low on time, but I just wanted to say thanks for sharing all that information. That's a lot of enlightening stuff. I definitely learned a lot in the past 20 or 30 minutes. All right, so that was a whopping 30-plus minute episode. Thanks again, Alex, for joining.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
All right, so we'll see you guys next time here on Android Design in Action. As always, I'm Roman Nurek.
I'm Alex Faaborg.
Bye from London, from Nick Butcher.
All right, see you guys later.
See ya.
Bye.
Adios.